So I think I'll get us started because I'm so excited to hear from our speaker today. So good afternoon and welcome to today's Health Justice Institute seminar lecture. And I, as some of you would know, I'm Sheila Wildman. I'm Associate Director of the Health Justice Institute. We meet once again in unceded territories of the Mi'kmaq, Wolastoqey, and Passamaquoddy peoples, sovereign nations holding inherent rights as the original peoples of these lands. We convene this series with respect for those inherent rights, mindful of our collective obligations under the Peace and Friendship Treaties and Section 35 of the Constitution Act 1982, which recognizes and affirms Aboriginal and treaty rights in Canada. We reflect also on the fact that African Nova Scotians are a distinct people whose histories, legacies, and contributions have enriched this part of Mi'kma'ki known as Nova Scotia for over 400 years. Today we have a critically important topic for our times. We're so delighted to welcome Elena Caruso with her lecture today, Self-Managed Abortion and Becoming Legal in 1970's Italy. We also have the delight of bringing together Elena with her research collaborator and my colleague at the Health Justice Institute, Professor Joanna Erdman, who I'll call on now to introduce our much anticipated speaker, Professor Erdman.
Hi, good afternoon everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. It's a real pleasure to introduce Elena and welcome her to Schulich Law and to this series. Elena received her PhD from the University of Kent and an MA from the University of Catania in Sicily. Elena is currently a postdoctoral fellow at the Department of Political Science at the University of Waterloo. And she's also the fellow, and I really like to say this because we share this place as our home. Elena is also a fellow of the International Reproductive and Sexual Health Law Program at the Faculty of Law at the University of Toronto. So we've known each other for, I don't know how many years now, quite a few years. And we came together through a shared research interest in self-managed abortion. And so I thought I'd say just a couple words about self-managed abortion. It's really much more than just a health practice. It is, and I think you'll see, a real political commitment to the idea that when people are well-resourced, when they're supported, that they can use pills and other means to safely end their pregnancies, and they can do it on terms that are most meaningful to them. And I think this real political commitment is why you are such a cherished member of our research community. Elena really has brought a very unique contribution to the field in terms of socio-legal research. And so this is something very special, and you'll see in the seminar today, Becoming Legal in 1970's Italy, Self-Managed Abortion is the primary star. But I definitely welcome all of you to think about the fact that really great historical research is great because it is always contemporary, and I think this is especially true of self-managed abortion, and especially true as we see in the US, but quite frankly in many other places too, abortion becoming illegal once again, and that justice movements, and the feminist movement included in that, are again proving a real political power. And maybe I'll use one of your phrases, which is great, often in dramatic and unorthodox ways. So thank you so much for joining us, and really looking forward to your seminar.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So thank you very much, Professor Erdman, for this introduction and the invitation. As she said, for researchers like me working on the legal study and legal analysis of abortion and self-managed abortion, more specifically, the scholarship of Professor Erdman is ongoing and continuous source of inspiration and guidance, I would say, as well. So thank you very much for this. And of course, thank you to Professor Wildermann, Sheila, for organizing the event and the series. As I was telling you earlier, I've been following over the years during my PhD and now as a postdoctoral fellow the work of this important center to think together, even remotely. And so thank you very much for putting us together through this seminar series. And of course, thank you also to Ashley Johnson for all the logistics and the fact that I was able to come here, and most of the effort is beyond the logistics from her. So thank you very much for that. And so of course I'm very much honored to present some of my work before you and to visit your university and your province. It's my first time here in Nova Scotia, and I'm a sea person, so I feel literally home for just this reason already. Today I'm going to present to you a chapter of my monograph to be called provisionally entitled Becoming Legal, Feminism and Abortion Law, which is based on my PhD dissertation that I defended in England in 2023. This book focuses on Italian feminism and becoming legal of abortion in 1970s Italy. As some of you might know, in Italy, abortion is still today regulated by an abortion law that dates back to 1978, so almost 47 years ago. And with this statute of 1978, Italy joined a small, albeit at the time a growing number of Western countries that were decriminalized under certain grounds abortion. This included this list of countries: Great Britain with the Abortion Act of 1976, as you know, Canada, of course, with the first reform that you had in 1979, the United States with the famous decision of 1973, the Roe decision, Sweden in 1974, France in 1975, for example. So in the case of Italy, before the legal change of the 70s, abortion was almost fully criminalized under a legislation that dated back to the 1930s, when there was in the country a dictatorship, fascism, called fascism. And this dictatorship was led by a man called Benito Mussolini. My book argues that the changes that occurred in the abortion law in the 70s on abortion cannot be fully understood without considering the role of the Italian feminist movement in shaping this piece of history. At the same time, also, the book wants to demonstrate that not only the feminist movement changed the law, but that this engagement with the law changed also in significant ways the Italian feminist movement itself over the 70s. So, as in many other Western countries, also the Canadian context, the new feminist movement in Italy as well established in around the 70s, in the early 70s, and was in the Italian context was particularly established on a strict critique of the law, which is, I think, very interesting for the people in this room. At least I consider this very interesting. So there was a strong critique of the idea that the law can really matter in changing concretely women's life. And so many of these Italian feminists were skeptical about the possibility of using and changing the law to pursue their political agenda of feminist liberation. Yet, starting from mid-70s and early 80s, some groups within the feminist movement eventually embraced a politics of legal reform in their activism as well. And they start also to engage directly with state and health institutions, an approach that somehow was unimaginable in the early 70s. In terms of method, the book that I'm writing, beyond, of course, traditional legal methods, also use extensive archival research, and that include the parliamentary feminist political records, as well as a set of original interviews with abortion campaigners of the 70s. So, besides being the first comprehensive study on Italian feminism and abortion law available in every language, this book also wants to propose a new theoretical framework of analysis of the relationship between social movements, legal change, and time, which I hope can be of interest also for those not necessarily interested in the Italian context or in feminism. So the framework that I developed is called Becoming Legal. I'm not the first one to use this notion. Has been used by scholars in the area of migration law, for example, has been used by scholars such as Myra Wright and Emily Cloat. But the way in which I developed this concept intends to address some limitations of conventional top-down approaches to legal reform, which tend to overlook the contribution of social movements to legal change, often resulting, in my opinion, in a gender-blind analysis. Through this Becoming Legal, I propose to rethink legal change as a bottom-up and polyphonic process that comprises informal proceedings as well as formal status changes over a significant period and through different stages. So offering a gender perspective on legal change, with Becoming Legal, I want to give new significance to often overlooked sites, agents, and practices. In this analysis of Becoming Legal, I analyze the 6 foci of Becoming Legal. The first is the feminist organization of abortion travel to London, so the organization of travel from Italy to London, where abortion was already decriminalized, as I said earlier, by the Abortion Act 1967. The second focus is the creation of illegal self-managed abortion groups, which is the object of this conversation of today. And third, the protest against the restrictive abortion bills that were discussed and debated in the parliament, the writing up of a feminist bill. So at some point, a part of the feminist movement wrote its own feminist bill and proposed it, submitted it to the parliament. The occupations of hospitals. So at some point after the legalization of 1978, some groups occupied hospitals, public hospitals, to teach the doctors how to perform feminist abortions. And the last focus is the mobilization to defend abortion law of 1978 from the risk of a repeal during this 2 abortion referendum of 1981. So for the lecture of today, as I said, I'm going to focus on self-managed abortion. This is the first time I present this work on self-managed abortion, so be kind in providing me feedback. I need them because I'm in the process of writing up the book, but this is also the first real test in public of these ideas. So I will articulate the lecture in 3 parts. The first is understanding self-managed abortion as a feminist practice. The second is self-managed abortion, in which I try, so in the first part I anticipate that I will argue that this practice of self-managed abortion contributed to the making of the feminist movement as a distinctive political subject within the political landscape of the time. In the second part on self-managed abortion and the social decriminalization of abortion, I argue that self-managed abortion contributed to make these anti-abortion laws that date back to the dictatorship, to fascism, inadequate, more inadequate and ineffective. In the third part, I explain why, while illegal, the self-managed abortion practice was not carried out in a vacuum of rules. So there were some rules, and so it was not an unregulated practice. So I start with the first part on self-managed abortion as a feminist practice. So abortion represented a significant terrain of practice and refinement of the politics of feminist liberation, contributing to shaping the identity of the feminist movement at the time. across Italy, the feminist movement and other groups related to a political party that is a bit misleading at the name. It was called Radical Party, but it was a liberal party. So together with the groups related to this radical party, whose members are often referred as the radicals, and part of the feminist group, these groups, even if they were not cooperating, but they open up, not always cooperating as we will see, they contributed to opening up alternative routes to safe abortion, to circumvent these fascist era anti-abortion laws. One of these routes was the organization of abortion travel abroad to London, as I said earlier, where abortion was already decriminalized under certain grounds. Another route, which is the focus of today, was the creation of self-managed abortion groups that operated illegally within the Italian territory. So in different cities across Italy, self-managed abortion represented another channel for the Italian feminist movement to create access to safe abortion, notwithstanding this ban. And with variation within the various parts of the country, self-managed abortion groups operated between 1973 and 1978. 1978 is again the year in which the abortion law was approved in Italy. These small groups of feminists practice self-managed abortion in private homes through the method of vacuum aspiration. Vacuum aspiration, as some of you might know already, is a practice that is still recommended by WHO, by the World Health Organization, and entails the evacuation of the uterus using a flexible cannula. This practice of vacuum aspiration was very important for the feminist movement in Italy because it was like using this technique in particular was another way to criticize the medical power on abortion. We'll talk about this later because medical doctors at the time were using a technique called dilatation and curettage that entails the use of a curette to scrape the uterine surface. Is a method that is considered not safe today still by of course, the World Health Organization. So these feminists were practicing vacuum aspiration abortion for free or modest fee to cover just the cost of the materials. What was distinctive about the feminist movement yet was not simply the use of this technique of vacuum aspiration, not the affordability simply of the abortion, because a similar standard of accessibility and safety could be available also elsewhere, including through these groups that I called before related to the radical party. So this was not necessarily a feature, a characteristic of the feminist movement. What characterized, in my opinion, the feminist movement was the embodiment of this abortion activism within a broader feminist practice, characterized by solidarity, separatism, consciousness raising, which resulted in an embryonic community-based model of healthcare. Separatism refers to the practice of gathering among women only, while consciousness raising refers to a self-practice of talking from oneself. So the importance of this framework helps to explain why self-managed abortion was, above all, within this group, considered a feminist practice and not a service. Thus, why the mobilization regarding self-managed abortion contributed to make the feminist movement as a distinctive political subject and voice within the Italian context. The reluctance of the feminists to consider their political commitment as a service was so important that some groups, for this reason, refused to perform abortions. So, for example, this is a group from Milan that said that grounded in this way why they didn't want to perform abortions, because they didn't want to risk looking like service providers. So they said, I'm quoting them, we believed that our function was not that one of a service, but that of a catalyst, which works within the contradictions, needs, and desires of women, of ourselves. As for abortion, however, we had no doubts. We knew well that if we had assumed the burden of practicing it, we would have ended up doing only that, as the strong demand would have eaten up every bit of our energy. So we had never dealt with it directly, and the rest of Milan already had other groups that had taken charge of it. Always in Milan, there were some groups, as emerged from this quote, that were practicing abortion, but still remarking their distance from the radicals. They were doing an abortion different from the one of the radicals. So I'm quoting this group. We are a group of 8 women, not graduates in medicine, who left the radicals last spring for political reasons. We did not agree on how the work was set up. The too high number of abortions later conducted by gynecologists did not allow us to broaden the discussion. It was not possible to have a direct engagement with the women, who in fact disappeared immediately afterwards. In practice, it was just a service with a very limited political impact. We were interested in self-help, that is, we could do abortion ourselves and for free. When we realized that we could not do these things with the radicals, that is, that there was really a fundamental dissent, not only on the methods, then we left the radical definitively. So also in Rome, similarly, in my research emerged this importance to remark a line between the feminist abortion and the one from the radicals. So this feminist from Rome said to me, we learned the abortion technique of vacuum aspiration from the French women. French women means the French feminist movement of the black, driving upon self-help, upon the major understanding that could arise from relationship of solidarity and sharing, from a change in the relationship with oneself, with the body. Self-help means establishing a new relationship between women. The person who had an abortion did not necessarily have experience of self-help, but a different relationship among women was born from this culture, more formative on both sides. It was not a service provided at that moment only, but it was an act of solidarity with many more nuances, more richness. So self-managed abortion, according to this feminist, was a feminist practice that was part of a broader way of practicing separatism and consciousness raising in this context. The importance of the relationship between the women that were practicing these abortions was a feature of this feminist practice of clandestine nucleus. Clandestine nucleus, or nuclei in plural, was another way in which these self-managed abortion groups were known, especially in the Roman context, in Rome. So once the feminists collected, so now I will show you more about this relationship, deriving from one of the very few reports, archival sources that I found of a report of an illegal feminist abortion. So to understand the document, it describes this abortion once the woman was accepted. So not everyone that wanted to have an abortion could have one. There were rules, as we will see. So once the person met the requirements, this is how eventually worked. I'm quoting from this document. Then we spend half a day preparing ourselves together with the women for the actual procedure. We clarify our political motivations, and women talk about their situation and their problems. In addition, we try to get to know and control the body through relaxation and breathing exercises. During this time, a relationship of trust is established with the people who work based on the seriousness of their commitment. The eventualities that might occur are clarified, and so are the political motivation and experience previously by other women. The relationship of trust is crucial during the procedure to mitigate the invasive aspect of the surgery for the woman who undergoes it and the tension from those performing the abortion. So this relationship of trust among women performing and having the abortion was particularly emphasized, as we see from also this other document. What is important about this aspect is that even if the people that were providing this abortion, these feminists, were skilled in practicing vacuum aspiration, in most of the cases they were no medical doctors. They didn't have a medical background. So in light of this lack of medical accreditation, some of the participants of my study who were practicing at the time illegal abortions told me that she still thinks so with admiration, and I'm quoting her, the courage of the women who relied upon them to have an abortion in this clandestine nuclei. So for similar reason, a group always in Milan reported that to make sure that the experience could have been easier for everyone, they tend to organize groups with multiple women. So I'm quoting them, they will not have the sense of being alone against everyone. So being together in groups of 2 or 3 pregnant women in the same situation was a way for them to make the women more relaxed about what was going on. So linked with trust, mutual care and solidarity, other important feature of this feminist practice of self-managed abortion was the critique against hierarchies among women performing abortion and those having abortion, but also hierarchies among those performing abortion, between those that had a medical background, for example, those not having that. So in another document from some feminists of Rome, for example, we can read, and I'm quoting from this document, the women who work in the nucleus are completely interchangeable. As soon as we have learned the technique well, there are no roles within the nucleus, in the sense that we try not to carry out a division of labor. It is a model of alternative medicine among women, in the sense of overturning the role and power of over our bodies, of those who usually hold it. And about the importance of this critique of the medical power, according to another group, I'm quoting from this other document, they say, for me the biggest push was a purely feminist awareness, basically the fact of always delegating to someone the knowledge and management of what is yours. The uterus is yours, the vagina is yours, but you don't know anything about it, and you have to constantly go to an idiot, a gynecologist, who tells you a lot of nonsense. So my very first need was to complete absolute total management of my body, end of quote. So in sum, the critique of the hierarchy invested not simply, as I said, who could provide abortion, but the entire relationship around the self-managed abortion. So in this framework was very important also direct involvement, of course, of the pregnant woman in setting up, for example, a comfortable environment and setting, which means the place where the abortion will eventually take place. So always driving from an historical document, so for example, is underlined the role of the person having the abortion in this practice. So A is an anonymized name, is a person who couldn't travel to London to have an abortion because she was a migrant in Italy, and so her visa didn't allow her to travel to London. So she had an illegal abortion with the feminist, with this group. And so they are talking about her abortion. A offered us her home without difficulty, and also once again, on another occasion when it was no longer a matter of her abortion, she also offered her home for abortions. So both times it was not just a matter of leaving the house available, but of actively collaborating so that the environment became as suitable as possible for the type of work. She had therefore prepared, cleaned and disinfected everything, which she said has also calmed her down. She was in fact very worried about the procedure and gave the last unnecessary touches to her already perfect preparatory work. We found the table covered with a white sheet, and other nearby tables were covered with white placemats, with everything necessary, cotton, disinfectant, blah, blah, blah. So this passage shows also how important for the success of the the practice, the operation, the surgery was the role of the person having the abortion. So still from the experience of this abortion from A, I'm quoting, the surgery took place quietly and quickly. A helped us a lot and felt no pain. We were also very quiet. After the procedure, A offered us tea and we talked a bit together about how she felt. The next day, A phoned me. She was happy and she was fine. So once again, the emphasis on the collective dimension of this abortion. And the second part of the document said, in case like this, we felt relieved and happy. I just felt a sense of satisfaction for having done this abortion in the best way. I always worried a lot that some residue of the fetus might be left and that hospitalization and the carriage might be required, and other physical and psychological trauma afterwards. So, despite this distinctive so one thing that I want to underline, because I think I still have time, is that despite, I don't want to romanticize what was going on there, because despite this feminist framework of mutual care, solidarity, etc., during my research also emerged that some of these people performing abortion were reported to have had burnout, experiencing nightmares, often involving fetuses, especially when there was a growing number of requests at some point. And so it became more and more difficult to accommodate all the requests, given the limited number of feminist abortion providers. So, but what I wanted to say, just to conclude this first part, is that this emphasis, I think, on that the feminists put on the way in which they were providing and they were performing these abortions, not as a service, but as a feminist practice, I think was very important in creating, in the shaping of the feminist movement itself, in creating a distinctive identity, which was not only about legal reform. It was not just a legal reform project. So, and I now go to the second part of the analysis of today, which is about how this practice of self-managed abortion, even if it was not directly linked with the project of legal reform, end up having, of course, legal consequences, because contributed to neutralize the anti-abortion criminal law and to make this law more difficult to enforce, even in cases of flagrant violations, as I think it's clear and self-evident in these groups. So regardless, it's clear that what was going on in these groups was not in compliance with the law of the time, and I would say not also of the law of this time. I found no record of state action against the feminists who self-manage abortions. This point is another point of interesting contrast with the radicals who instead strategically engage with the state to raise public awareness of the urgency to repeal this fascist era anti-abortion law through a referendum. So these are also aspects of not necessarily engage directly with the state and provoke the state is another element that characterizes the practice of this feminist. So my view is that a lack of enforcement of anti-abortion laws to repress feminist self-managed abortion cannot be explained in a different way, that a deliberate choice to not intervene, which reveals that at some point there was a tolerance, an implicit tolerance for a feminist management of abortion. So, for example, according to one of my participants, the police, I'm quoting her, the police did not want to arrest us unless you called them. And in her opinion, I'm quoting her, nobody was looking for us. Similarly, another of my participants told me, I'm convinced that the police knew everything. They didn't do anything because that wasn't the situation. A mess would have happened if the police had caught any of us. I mean, a strong reaction at the level of the movement, because I don't think they didn't know. It seems to me that only police force of utter jerks could not have known what we were doing. So on the other hand, I think that the state turned a blind eye, let's say, on the crimes that were committed within the feminist movement, but so de facto tolerated this level of management. But on the other hand, as I anticipated, the feminist movement refused to directly defy the state on this terrain, differently from what the radicals did. So another feminist from Rome told me that she thinks that their approach was, I'm quoting her, like moving underwater. That means they were following an approach of avoiding any spectacular violation of the law in the self-managed abortion practice and flowing through the inconsistencies and contradiction of the legal system. So according to this feminist, among us feminists, there have been no arrests like those of the radicals. The radicals had a different way of acting. They challenged the state institution by being prepared to be arrested. Instead, we did not have this as one of our aims. So they were not using provocation. Rather, I would say that the development of a new knowledge of the body and medicine, the network of solidarity between women made us stronger in trying to change the way institutions operate. So, consonant with this cautionary attitude, some feminists I talked to and with during my research recalled that they were following some instruction and advice to limit as much as possible any potential criminal risk. Some of these, of course, include the fact that they did not keep any notes about these activities, which of course is a problem for a researcher. And they, for example, rotate the location of the bag. So that was the bag where they used to keep all the medical instruments and materials to perform abortions. The fact that these illegal groups were very small, and there was a rotation, and there was a kind of check of the private house in which abortion were performed in advance. And then the address was communicated just shortly before to the others. But despite all these precautions, at least one of my participants told me that for her, providing this abortion was a source of stress, and she had mixed feelings related to this. So she told me, so then we started doing the clandestine nuclei. I had a bit of anxiety. It's not that I'm anxious, but I thought, what if they follow me, if they catch me, if something happens, if that one reports you to the police, if that one feels sick, what do we do? Clearly there was a whole network, but the point is that I didn't feel relaxed. I never felt relaxed the time I went there. So it wasn't a relaxed experience for everyone, but some other participants told me that maybe because they were very young, they never really felt that were at all concerned about the criminal consequences, potential criminal consequences of their action. So, for example, one of my participants told me, I'm very lucky, I never had a problem, but I do remember the other person was with whom I was doing the abortion, and one day leaving a woman halfway to an abortion because she thought the police was coming and didn't want to ruin her career. So that was a difficult moment because the pregnant woman became hysterical, quite rightly, and this other woman that was providing the abortion just left the room and the apartment. So there were some issues related to this activity as well. So to conclude this second part, what I was trying to show is that despite this decision and this approach to moving underwater, what I want to say is that this feminist activism of self-managed abortion contested, even if it might look counterintuitive, the silence and secrecy traditionally characterizing illegal abortions, and that characterized and permitted the endurance of fascist anti-abortion law because of this feminist network and the political framework around this illegality. And so what I want to try to demonstrate is that this feminist mobilization regarding abortion contributed to make the enforcement of anti-abortion laws more difficult, if not impossible, even in cases of clear violation, exactly because of this political framework. And I now go quickly to the last point, which is about why illegality does not mean lack of rules. So I identify at least 7 rules governing the practice of self-managed abortion across the different small units across the country. That I'm just listing to you. So the first was that conducting a self-managed abortion in loco in Italy was generally considered an option of last resort when there were no other option available, which means traveling to London. That was the first option. Second, the woman had generally, the pregnant person was generally assessed. Sometimes, for example, in Turin, some groups had also a preliminary checkup with a gynecologist, a medical doctor. So there was a kind of screening, health screening. A third was that there was a kind of gestational age limit. There was not a strict rule, but usually between 8 and 10 weeks of pregnancy, that was the limit. Fourth, the technique that on this was a strict rule was always vacuum aspiration, which was generally undergone with the use of analgesic and without anesthesia. In some contexts, there were also a small number of menstrual extractions that were practiced, but it was not really a thing within the Italian feminist movement. Fifth, the person who performed the abortion was generally a feminist or person part of the feminist movement who had the training in performing vacuum aspiration, but this doesn't mean that she had necessarily a medical background. Six, there was a form of follow-up or a medical backup system in case of complications. 7, the woman's decision concerning the procedure and their active involvement was particularly emphasized within this practice. In my research, I didn't find any record of any adverse incidents regarding this feminist activity in self-managed abortion. And as one of my participants told me, she said I was very lucky because it's not only a matter of skills, it's also a matter of luck. I mean, we had a number of problems that were avoided because of this screening, the fact that there was a doctor screening the people having the abortion who was not a doctor or a person with a medical background. So I think that in the absence of alternatives, given the legal restrictions that there were at the time, and the impossibility of traveling abroad, in my view, these feminists were providing a safe and affordable way to access abortion before the law reform in 1978. And from this perspective, I think that this experience of self-managed abortion offers a significant new argument to challenge the commonplace that illegality and the lack of medical setting are not necessarily a synonym with the unsafety or darkness of the past times. And also I think it sheds a light on the potential inaccuracy of stigmatizing labels to refer to abortion in the past before legal reform, all as backstreet abortions or unsafe abortions. When it comes to describe the more complex historical reality of abortion performed before legal reform, as I try to do today with you. At the same time, I also want to underline that this experience sheds a light also on the contradictory, ambivalent, and complex position of some medical doctors in this activism. I would say some of these doctors of conscience were very important for the feasibility of this type of activism, even if very few of them. In my research, I think I came across only to 2 doctors that were actively practicing self-managed abortion. Nevertheless, they played an important role in many other ways, because there were some of those that were screening the women before the abortion, and also some of them were providing a backup in hospitals. So feminists could call a friend doctor and bring eventually the woman to the hospital. So there was also the presence of the medical doctors in this story that I think is interesting to analyze and consider. So just to conclude very quickly, what I want to try to say today, telling you this story, is that around self-managed abortion, I think we can see how self-managed abortion contributed to the make of the movement, of the feminist movement, with some of its characteristics. And on the other side, also how this practice contributed to change the law, making it more ineffective and difficult to enforce, creating new arguments for its legal reform. So to go back to the framework of this book that I'm writing about becoming legal, I think that self-managed abortion represented one of the first fronts of becoming legal, which in my opinion lied in how a new political subject galvanized in order to address the shortcomings of the law, and how this political mobilization not simply contributed to making the existing law outdated, but also how this practice can generate and establish new norms, grounding new arguments for their own legalization. So this is most of what I wanted to tell you today. Some of what I've been published from this research about feminism and abortion in the 70s is here, so it's not so much yet. Hopefully there will be something more. So this article on social and legal studies speaks about, it's about the feminist occupation of one hospital in Rome, in case you are interested. And Does History Matter speaks a bit on why I like very much history in this context of abortion. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope I didn't speak too much. Okay, great, thank you. And thank you again for this amazing opportunity.
We have lots of time for questions. There's 20 good minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting presentation. One thing I was struck by is the fact that the police didn't police these nuclei that were performing abortion. Did that speak? Do you have a sense? Was there sort of broad acceptance in the general population of abortion? Because I don't know the law and the details of the Canadian context, but I was under the assumption sometimes like people would like would rat on clinics that were happening illegally, and there were raids of clinics, and that's part of the Canadian history. And so that really struck me. And so I just want to know what your thoughts on why there wasn't a lot of like raids.
So I think that the eventual arrest of a feminist, of an activism, will have make even more stronger the argument. So that is that sentence that I underline at some point when these participants said there was a strong reaction at the level of the movement. So we have to contextualize all of this in the context of the 70s, which is a context in which in Italy there were a lot of, on both sides, right-wing and left-wing, violent also organizations, like these are also the years of the Red Brigades kidnapping and murdering a former prime minister of the state. So there was, I think, an interest to contain as much as possible the growing up of social movements, and the best way to create a movement is to suppress it. And so the police knew that. So in this sense is very interesting, the tactic of the feminist was at some point to not engage, to not provocate, while the other groups of the radicals who had a clear legal reform agenda, organized strategically arrest, one even in a theater, so it was really theatrical. This activist, Adele Faccio, was arrested on the stage by the police. So also I think this was possible because there were many actors. So there were already the radicals organizing these very theatrical arrest. And so the feminists could afford, I would say, also to not engage in this way. And this also was another way to mark them from the others. So it was always a way. So around the self-managed abortion was one of those fields in which the feminists were marking, we are different, we have a different position, we have a different approach. Also because this is linked with this idea of the law. The radicals had a clear legal reform agenda. So we are doing self-managed abortion because we want to prove to the state that we need to change the law. So everything was related with the idea that this law was not good and we had to change it, we have to repeal it. For the feminists, that was not the main goal. The point was to share, to criticize, to show that there was another way to practice medicine, another way to stay together as women around this topic. So, there is this aspect. The second point is also that more broadly, it's true that these laws were very difficult to enforce at some point, especially after 1975, when we had a constitutional ruling that partly recognized the lack of constitutionality of this framework of crimes. So, and the parliament was debating around that. So between 1975 and 1978, when the law was approved, it was not very, it was clear that this law was outdated. So it was very difficult to enforce that. Also in case of clear violations. So for example, there was this case of this medical doctor from Naples giving an interview about how, the fact that he was a millionaire and he wanted to reach 2 million of lira, that was the currency at the time, let's say, I think it's kind of 1 million of euros, so maybe 2 million almost of Canadian dollars. Like he wanted to reach this number, this figure, and then stop doing illegal abortions because he was so rich. And he gave an interview on La Stampa, which is one of the major newspaper. And of course, if you give with your name, so at some point there was an investigation against him, but the fact that he could release an interview with his name saying, yeah, I'm untouchable because I perform abortion to the wife of the judge, the wife of that. So no one can, because, you know, I do abortion in basically of the Naples establishment. So it was such a mass phenomenon that I think it was difficult to enforce, except for cases, of course, like this. Like, of course, if you release an interview talking about that, you might go in troubles. So, yeah. But also, I think it's a different legal culture. So I think for a Canadian, this is difficult to appreciate.
Although that's what Dr. Morgenthaler did too.
Yeah.
Was say, I will
Yeah.
and have been performing abortions.
Yeah.
Arrest me. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I think in that case, it was more just like a person rather than a grassroots and spread illegality. So I would say probably that was an element.
But also, please put up hands and feel free to moderate yourself, because I won't always see everyone, so I'm going to leave that to you. But I'm following up on that, because one way of my engaging with what the story you're telling is that there was a certain ecology of social movements at the time, working toward a common end, but taking different routes there. And one of the things I noticed in your way of describing the story, and I find this just so thought-provoking about so many different movements and just features of our times that I'm trying to, sort of process which connections to draw. So as you were describing this ecology, you've got some fairly clean lines. Like the radicals were this, and they were seeking law reform. The feminists were that, and they were doing clandestine. And I'm following that really well because it's making sense to me. But I also thought at the time, I wouldn't be surprised if there were people inside, let's say, the group you're calling the radicals, that said, law is not the issue. We have to stop the police. And our way of dealing with the police, this starts to now resonate with our times. Mm-hmm. Our way of wanting to stop the police is to get out and mobilize. We're going to have an Occupy. We're going to stand. We're going to hold, And that's not so much like, yeah, we're about law reform. It's about we want to confront the police, and we have to do that to incite a social movement. And yes, we need a response, but that's necessary to move the politics. And so I just put that to you as, I guess, in your research, because you're doing this deep research, do you find that the lines may be messier, and then how do you make those decisions about like how to describe that movement, you know? And then the second part is, whoa, it just gets so complicated when you think about how social change happens, right? Like everybody has kind of their part in it, in the way you've described, and maybe they're all necessary. I don't know how you prioritize them.
So the focus of my research is the feminist movement, but of course the feminist movement didn't have fixed boundaries, like the boundaries were very mobile, and also the relationship with the radicali and the other group that was a women's group, national women's group related to the Communist Party. So the feminist movement in the early 70s established itself as an alternative to the radicali that had this liberal tradition and the communist. So at the beginning, marking the difference between these two groups, which was mainly around the practice of consciousness raising and separatism, which were not two practices of these two groups, and that had also relationship with political parties, while the feminist movement didn't have political relationship with any political party, was very critical of that actually. So this was the beginning of the story, and practice like this at the beginning in the first part of the 70s helped to mark these boundaries, which as you might see also from the presentation were not always so strict. So for example, one of the first group I mentioned in Milan, at the beginning they were radicals, and then they moved to they then abandoned the radicals. So of course everything is interconnected, but at some point these groups stop, let's say, drawing these lines in such a clear way, exactly because of topics like abortion. So for example, the relationship with the radicals in the 1978, which is also the year of the law, changed completely because the women's group related to the radicals decided to cut the relationship with the radical party. So there was a feministization of these political groups related to political parties that started to embrace separatism, start to embrace consciousness raising, which were practices that they were actively refusing until that moment. So, and at the same time, the feminist movement started to be less critical about engagements with the legal reform. So there has been a mutual influence. On one side, the feministization of these women's groups, and at the same time, the feminist movement being more open to engage with practice that were not strictly feminist, including occupying an hospital. Occupying an institution is like in the 70s, is the most leftist technique that we had in the 70s. So, and they started doing a thing that leftist groups would have done. So they started using some technique that were not part of their repertoire as a social movement. So there is a commission. But at the beginning, in order to say we are different from what there is already, they had, like, abortion served to say, yeah, but we do this different from the radicals, we're different from the UDI, that were the communists, etc., etc. So, and abortion was important for this creation of this identity as an autonomous identity. One of the biggest demonstration on abortion in Italy was on 6th December 1975, and was a separatist demonstration, only women, that were attacked at some point by a far left group who refused the separatism choice. So they attacked violently the group. So that demonstration in Rome marked a way to talk about abortion in a feminist way, for example. So yes, what I'm trying to say is that abortion was a way to think. It was that topic for the feminist movement in the 70s. Was not the only one, but the most important probably, to think about their identity and what made them different from other groups that were doing very similar things. So, if not almost the same. I think I'm not missing, I'm self-managing the...
Just building on what you said, and thank you so much for your talk today. The feminists that were occupying the hospital, the last incidents where they were then removed, there was a description in your paper about how they had almost gone too far, where they had taken over the operating rooms and started to transform how like medical delivery was taking place, and that seemed to ruffle the feathers of the doctors too much. Like they had gone a step too far, and it kind of seems as though that's going towards the legal reform method, right? Going just beyond abortion. So do you think that within their time of being in the occupation of the hospital, their views of trying to reform other like women's health care rights in general started to be pursued, like just beyond abortion? See my question?
Yeah. So abortion, I think, was, as I said earlier, the topic to think, but through abortion, there were many other things that feminists were talking. So abortion was an important entry point to talk about women's health, to criticize the medical power, the idea of medical knowledge and technique. So around abortion, there was an important strand that was working on women's health more in general. So it wasn't only about abortion, it was also about, some of these groups that were providing abortion were organized, for example, in self-organized health centers. So these self-organized health centers, women learned how to, for example, visit themselves with the speculum. So like around abortion, it was the topic to galvanize around the body and to conduct a body politics. But it wasn't all about that. So when abortion it was not anymore the hot topic, for example, in the early 80s, started all a mobilization around the demedicalization of birth at home within this milieu of feminist movement. So what I want to say is that abortion was an important entry point. It was the hot topic. It was a topic that was able to mobilize at a big scale a lot of women, because it was a very spread issue, but it wasn't only about abortion. So,
I have a quick one. All right.
Okay.
So much fascinating what you talked about. And I didn't quite follow the distinction that you were making, although you can tell it's really rich, between the separatism and the consciousness raising. Was there a tension between those two things, or are they just two mechanisms that work together very well? Like,
yeah, they work together.
Follow up is, why did the other group, the radical group, reject that? Because it seems to me just such a natural for any kind of political movement.
So separatism meant at the time talking only to women.
I see, okay.
So meant no men involved. The radicals said the medical doctors that were men, it was a mixed group. The same also the communists, they rejected the idea of separatism. Separatism was one of those defining points on which for the feminist movement, also in the practice of abortion. So for example, in these health centers, a man going there to get information about abortion to London or whatever, going there on behalf of the wife, the girlfriend or whatever, will not receive any information, were not accepted. So separatism means that. Consciousness raising is a bad translation of autocoscienza in Italian. I say it's a bad translation because I think it doesn't give this sense of self. So it was no consciousness raising. It was self-consciousness raising in a collective setting. But I say I decide, but it's an open question for me. So I translate autoconscience as the consciousness raising, but it is basically a self-reflective practice in a collective setting.
I think that's the same way we use it
Yeah.
typically, but I wasn't
Yeah.
certain because
Yes.
you have that emphasis on self-reflection.
Yes.
You kind of push that.
Yeah, exactly. That is in the context, like in the Italian context, and I think this is related a bit with, that's a bit of a speculation with our strong religious context, like this strictness on separatism and self-reflection reminds me of non-practice, but this is something I haven't theorized yet, but I think the way the Italian feminist movement understood these two practices was particularly strict. It's true that also in Canada embrace similar political practice, but I think the strictness that we had was a bit unique of the Italian context. And the other groups that I'm referring to, the radicals and the communists, they didn't agree on these two practices at the beginning. Eventually, yes, but not at the beginning, for the most all the 70s. So, so this was another element that for the feminists was important of their practice, because they were all women, so they could, and it was part of this feminist consciousness together, while with the radicals he was a medical doctor, you give 10,000 lire and he provides you because it's part of another political agenda. It was not about talking, reflecting, etc. It was not, we are in a circle and we are doing abortions together.
Just about time. Oh God, please go, because we have a few minutes left for sure.
Yeah, no, thanks, Sheila. I would just love a kind of reflection as a historian on the context. You know, thinking today, abortion practices have changed so much. The legal context in many places are changing again, and what you see of what I would call a contemporary self-managed abortion movement being different or alike, to the history in Italy.
So I would say that what's the Latin American experience, and I like reading a lot about the Latin American experience of self-managed abortion, contemporary experience, has been very helpful for me to analyze. When you said earlier that history is contemporary, is always contemporary, for sure that there is that aspect. So I would say that some of that strong political milieu that I see in the 70s Italy, I see also in the Latin American movement for social justice around abortion. So I think there is a genealogy, like I see some lines about how abortion is still in some context a topic that galvanizes groups to think about also other broader issues and still makes together people with some, I think, relevant points of contact also, surprisingly. I think this critique of the medical power, for example, of the importance of solidarity, the importance of the quality of the relationship, the political relationship that comes out from this activism, stay together. I think I see some important connections. So I would say that in the Italian context, now that there is the law, it's more difficult to think in those terms about self-managed abortion movement in the strict sense, because there is a law, so it's more difficult when there is a law that is liberal to create a movement like this. But there are for sure a lot, especially in this specific moment, there is a lot of coming back of the 70s. They are back in the conversation. So for example, one of the hospitals that was occupied in 1978 in Turin was reoccupied last September. So I can see that there are some, I think that in a way there is a kind of sometimes going back to certain, of course not in the same way, but there is a kind of line of history that, like a thread, like I don't like think of new things as just new. I always like to see the elements of the continuity through history and the fact that the self-managed abortion movement today is still a movement for justice, against oppression, for building another idea of what is healthcare. And so I see in this a genealogy with the story that I try to tell today. But
Thank you so much. Joanna, do you want to close or shall I be the last couple? I'm just going to come up and awkwardly displace you and formally thank you. So hold on 1 second. So I awkwardly walked to the stage. Wow. And I kind of feel like we're just getting into a whole new side of this conversation. And if I could, I would say, let's come back in an hour with some lunch and sit down and continue the inquiry that Professor Erdman just raised to you. But of course, we have the limit of time. So I'm going to take just a second to remind you that we have another lecture coming up. It is in 1 week. And so that's Friday, March 7th. And Professor Yale Cannon is coming from Georgetown University Law Center. And her topic is Medical Legal Partnerships in Pursuit of Health Justice. So I'm going to be carrying with me some of what we've just left off with today as I think about what it means for folks working in healthcare and folks working in law to come together with the objective of reaching the most marginalized populations and creating something like access to health justice. What would that mean? So I'm really excited to welcome Dr. Cannon, and I'm so delighted, and also it's with a heavy heart as I think about the ways that social movements are mobilizing or desperately trying today. And many people are not linked up to social movements, and they are very alone and individual. So it's a really right time for us to think about what these words mean, like consciousness raising or mobilizing. What does that even mean? And you've given us so much to think about. So please join me in thanking Elena for her incredible gift to us today.